Van harte welkom bij deze livestream van Christen voor Israël met vanavond een hele bijzondere gast. Zij werkt al jarenlang voor het Joodse agentschap voor Israël. En in die hoedanigheid zet ze zich in voor mensen die Aliyah willen maken. Dat betekent emigreren naar Israël. Haar naam is Danielle Mor. Ze is geboren in de Verenigde Staten, maar ze woont al ik weet niet hoe lang in Israël. Vanavond een bijzonder gesprek over haar persoonlijke verhaal, over haar ervaringen binnen haar werk en welke uitdagingen ze mee te maken heeft in het werken met emigranten die van over de hele wereld naar Israël komen. Danielle Mor, welcome.
Thank you very much.
It's good to have you here. First of all, you have been involved in the Aliyah for many years. What is the most remarkable moment in all those years that you have worked for the Jewish Agency?
I think that's like asking a mother to say which is her favorite child. So it's a tough question. But there were many beautiful and moving moments that relate to our work of Aliyah. Really, I've been at the Jewish Agency for 22 years now.
22 years?
Yes. But there was one moment that stood out, and it still stands out because it's a relationship that was formed, and we're still in that relationship. And I'll tell you the story.
Mm-hmm.
A few years ago, a Jewish man from the United States, he came and he said, I would like to honor the memory of my father who passed away, and I would like to make a donation to help young olim who come to Israel get an education, because my father came to Israel as a teenager, but he never had an education, and he always felt really sad that he didn't have that opportunity. And we started on the project, and he really reached out, and we got to help young olim get an education. It was a beautiful project. And as we got to know each other a little bit more, I asked him, so what's the story of your father? When did he come to Israel? How old was he? And he told me he came to Israel as a 16-year-old boy in 1938. And I said, what do you mean in 1938?
So before the Second World War started?
Before, but so soon, still to the rise of the Nazis in Germany. I said, where did your father come from? And he said, from Vienna. So I said, okay, this is after the Anschluss, after Austria was occupied. And he said, yes. So I said, how did he come to Israel? And he said, well, I have no idea, I don't know. So he said, let's find out. So we went together to the Zionist archives in Jerusalem, and the archivist over there did a phenomenal job, and they came out with a file this thick, Sarah.
About this man?
About this man.
This man's father, actually.
Yes, exactly. But it's really, it's his history. And that file told, page after page, it told the story of how as a young boy in Vienna, he was all alone. His mother had died. He was left trying to evade the Nazis. And at some point, he was found by a youth movement that was connected with a Jewish agency. And he was then brought to Israel on one of the youth Aliyah ships that the Jewish agency purchased in those years and placed in a kibbutz. And it really, page after page, told the story of what happened to him. It had entire articles that his father wrote as a teenager, sharing his dreams and his aspirations. And the son that was looking at these pages, looking at the handwriting of his father, pages that were written 70, almost 80 years ago, he just couldn't believe it, and he was crying.
Because he didn't know that.
He didn't know it. A man in his 60s was crying, and we were all crying at some point. And it just made you realize, in Judaism we have a saying, medor lador, from generation to generation, how you pass on. And really, that story of life-saving Aliyah, there were kind people at that time that put the funds and that helped so that the Jewish agency could bring his father out of the Nazi rule in Austria. And today, almost 80 years later, he was doing it.
History is repeating in some ways, yeah. So we're going to talk about the work of the Jewish Agency later, but first one step back, because Jewish Agency for Israel was founded in 1929. What was the goal of the organization back then?
It was a quite simple goal, not too ambitious really. The goal was to unite the global Jewish people and give them a national home in the land of Israel.
Already back then?
Yes, that was the goal when it was founded. It was to bring together all the Jews of the world, whether they define themselves as Zionists or not, to manage and to build up, to start laboring for Zion in the land, and to represent the Jewish people to the nations of the world, whether it was to the British Mandate or to the United Nations that was forming in those years, and really to bring about the realization of the prayer, to give the Jewish people a home in their homeland.
Right, because it also served as some kind of a government, just before 1948 when Israel was founded. How did that happen? What was the role of the Jewish Agency then?
So like you said, Sarah, it was serving as the pre-state government of the State of Israel. The chairman was David Ben-Gurion, already from 1935.
The first Prime Minister of Israel.
Exactly. Yeah. He came into the building as chairman and he left as the first Prime Minister of the State of Israel. Yeah. And there were departments in the Jewish Agency that managed all aspects the way that a government today would manage. The Jewish Agency even founded what's today known as the Mossad. So every aspect, security, health, education, it was all managed by the Jewish Agency.
And just to have it in a nutshell, how did the organization, the Jewish Agency for Israel, develop throughout the history from 1948 until today?
So in 1948, the executive of the agency transitioned to becoming the first government. The first democratic elections ever were held in the country in November of 1948, and then the Knesset was sworn in the Jewish Agency building.
Yes, the parliament, huh? Yeah.
Yes, exactly, the Parliament of Israel. And the Jewish Agency began then working hand in hand with the government of Israel, transitioning roles to the government. But it was clear to the government of Israel that the Jewish Agency had a major role to play.
Which
is? So in 1951, they made the status law of the Jewish Agency saying that the State of Israel is not a state like any other. It's not responsible only for the citizens within its borders or maybe for citizens that are living in other countries. It's responsible for the global Jewish people, to be a light to the global Jewish people, to the world. And a government can't engage and work with citizens in another country to encourage them to feel identity, to encourage them to immigrate, to make Aliyah.
So therefore they needed actually another organization to do that for them.
And that's why they instated it in law, that this is the role of the Jewish Agency, to be that bridge between the government and the people of Israel to the global Jewish people.
Right. So serving actually the global Jewish people and also helping in Aliyah, the return of the Jewish people to Israel.
So that was the role of the Jewish Agency really since 1929. And in 1948, once the state was established, so again, because of this duality between, on the one hand, the state wants to encourage Jewish people to come and live in the state. On the other hand, as a government, they can't engage in that in an open way. It was the role of the Jewish Agency. And so since 1948, the gates of Aliyah opened wide, what was never for the past 2,000 years. And the Jewish Agency brought to Israel over 3.3 million.
3.3 million.
Yes.
That came to Israel through Jewish Agency.
Yes, and it really means that every second person in Israel today is a person that either made Aliyah themselves or is the son or the daughter of somebody who made Aliyah.
So who are we talking about? Because you say we bring the Jewish people, so everybody who has Jewish ancestors in some way, they can be brought to Israel by the Jewish Agency? Who are we talking about?
So it's based on the law of return. The law of return is a unique law in the State of Israel, which determines that the State of Israel will be open to the ingathering of its exiles. And indeed, from over 100 countries, Jews have been coming back to live in the land. The dream of 2,000 years for next year in Jerusalem could come true. And the law of return defines who is eligible. And it went through different decisions because there is a way to look at Judaism through the very halachic, traditional rabbinic way. And there are ways that are also more relevant to today's life around the world. And what was eventually decided, and this was very, very important at the time, was that if you were Jewish enough to be murdered by the Nazis, then you're Jewish enough to be welcomed in Israel. So if you have one Jewish grandparent and you state that your faith is Judaism and that you want to be a part of Israel as a Jew,
then you're
and
welcome.
You can prove that, then you're welcome.
Yeah. So which group at this moment, because you say that in Israel live Jewish people from 100 countries from the world, which groups of Jews in countries have the greatest need at this moment to make Aliyah, to come to Israel?
So really, whereas in the first years it was from 100 countries, in recent years we see Aliyah coming from between 30 to 50 countries. Sometimes it can be 1 or 2 Jews coming from Japan. But that is currently the number, because most of the Jews that were living in the Muslim Arab countries, those communities are simply not in existence anymore. Once the State of Israel was established, those countries did not want the Jews to live in them anymore, and basically persecuted them and pushed them to
So you could say
leave.
that this Aliyah is finished from the Arab countries.
Yes,
Yeah.
and what we see happening today is a further reinforcement to what we've seen in recent years, and the reinforcement, unfortunately, is the war in Ukraine. Such the worst human catastrophe in Europe since World War II. And what it has caused is not just these little ripple effects, but tsunamis of impact. And what we see now is that the most dramatic Aliyah is from Russia, Ukraine. Somewhat of the surrounding countries are being impacted, and also, of course, at this time, Ethiopia.
Let's talk about Russia and Ukraine, about the war. Describe us what happened in your work in February 2022. When you woke up and you checked your telephone and you saw a war has started.
Yes. It's like people in the United States, you ask them, where were you when Kennedy was shot? Or in Israel, where were you when Rabin was shot?
Yeah.
So to us, it's like, where were you when the news of the war in Ukraine found you? We've been working on the ground in Ukraine for some 30 years now. Ever since the fall of the Iron Curtain, the collapse of the Soviet Union, we came in there to reach the Jewish people and to help them find their way back to Jewish life, to identity, to reclaim what communism stole from them for 70 years. And at that time, we set up transit centers, and people were coming out by trains. And there was amazing support also by Christian friends that brought through ships from the port of Odessa. And really very, very dramatic years. And since then, we have been on the ground in Ukraine. I would say that in the last year, we've been in Ukraine with about 100 staff divided between the area of encouraging and helping with Aliyah and staff that was helping in the area of Jewish education, summer camps, Sunday schools, Hebrew Ulpanim. And so we were there on the ground. And as the winds of war started to blow, nobody thought that there would actually be a war. They thought maybe there would be something similar to what happened in 2014.
Only in the east of the country.
Only in the east of the country, creating perhaps some refugee situation within the country, but very limited in scope.
Yeah, but then we woke up and we saw that the whole of Ukraine was being bombed.
And that required a complete shift in our operations. And thank God the fact that we were there on the ground and so embedded with the communities, and at the same time that we have the unique relationship with the government of Israel, those two things enabled us to move in two ways. One, to have our people there on the ground to be able to collaborate and to arrange passages and to buy buses and to bring out people to safety. And on the other hand, to arrange with the government of Israel that we are now opening shelters in the bordering countries, that we are bringing actually the consulates and the embassies of Israel to work from within our shelters to help and give the visas for Aliyah, and to give our staff diplomatic passports so that they could be there at the borders with diplomatic status and help cross in and out and bring people to safety.
What about you? How did your days look like these first weeks of the war?
Probably similar to yours, Sarah.
Not so much sleep?
No, not so much sleep. A very big heaviness in the heart, because it was just so devastating. Every story, every image, every person on the phone. We opened a call center 24/7. Thousands and thousands of calls came in the first days and the first weeks. Since the start of the war, we've had already over 160,000 calls that came in.
Of people who needed help.
People who needed help. And it was you had to be constantly on and constantly energized and able to work. At the same time, your heart was breaking from within.
Is there like a specific story that you remember from this start of the war of Ukraine?
Oh, a 97-year-old man who did not want to leave Ukraine months ago when his son made Aliyah, insisted that he's staying, that the Nazis drove him away once and that he's staying now in the country. And when the war started, his son pulled every connection he could to try and get his 97-year-old father on a bus. What that man went through for almost 2 weeks on that journey, and his son came to our shelter in Warsaw to wait for him. Our people actually had to carry him off the bus and bring him to the shelter. And you know, that moment when he and his son could embrace one another, that was very powerful.
Yeah.
And the women, Sarah, the women that had to make a choice that they are leaving their husbands behind.
Because of the fact that the men couldn't leave the country.
18 to 60.
Yeah, exactly.
So you know, what does a mother do? And I met so many mothers like this that they have maybe a son who's 20 and a daughter who's 16 and their husband is 50 and you know, what do they do?
Yeah.
Do they send the daughter? Do they come with the daughter? Do they leave behind their son? And women with even small babies that, you know, it was bitter cold in the early part of the war.
Yeah.
Very, very, very difficult.
Yeah.
And at the same time, you know, all these little miracles. One woman that I met, she fled with her 3-month-old baby, carrying her in her arms, not even having a stroller or a baby carrier or anything, just like carrying her 3-month-old baby in her arms for over a week in the journey. She finally made it out. She made it to Israel, and her husband was fighting in the war. He got wounded and was so discharged. And so almost 9 months after they parted, he now joined her in Israel.
Amazing, yeah. But when we started talking about Ukraine, you also mentioned that many Jews from Russia are also fleeing the country. And last summer it has been in the news that there is some problems with the Jewish agency's presence in Russia. What can you share with us about the situation there?
So it's a sensitive situation. You know, the Jewish Agency works in some 66 countries around the world, so we're very accustomed to working according to the legal requirements in each country. And in Russia, there has been a certain claim that was made by the government of Russia that we are acting as a foreign agent and that we are collecting the data of the citizens of Russia.
Like secret information, that's what you mean?
Basically, it's people that want to make Aliyah, and so they're contacting and they're giving, you know, information about themselves so that they can be approved to make Aliyah. And this case has come to court, and there is a very strong sense that there is simply no way that we could stop operating in Russia. We're still talking about something like 600,000 Jews in Russia. It's one of the biggest communities in the world. And so we have adapted the way that we work. We have had to open very quickly a call center in Moscow and St. Petersburg so that the information, the requests would be coming in only locally, that they wouldn't be transferred to Jerusalem in any way. And we are putting our faith in both, I would say, God and our very good legal advisors in this process.
It's a tense situation, I can imagine.
It is tense. And it's tense also because of the overall environment. It doesn't stand alone, obviously.
What do you mean by that? You mean it goes together with the war that is still ongoing?
Yes, because of the situation of the war. And when you look at the data, they're just tens of thousands of Russian Jews that want to come to Israel at this point.
Yeah. Let's talk about Ethiopia. It's a different story, and it's also it shows the variety of things that the Jewish Agency is doing in different countries. Ethiopia is a story of its own. Can you describe me the situation of the Jewish people who are still living in Ethiopia right now?
So the Ethiopian Jewish community is considered one of the most ancient exiles of the Jewish people. They're actually believed to be the tribe of Dan that was exiled by the Babylonians and then followed the course of the Blue Nile south, further from Egypt, further from Yemen, and eventually settling in Ethiopia, heavily persecuted there over the centuries, and living in these very mountainous, rural, remote regions of the country. and keeping very strongly to their Jewish faith in a very biblical way, because they were cut off from the rest of the Jewish world. So all the more modern traditions, modern 1,000 years old traditions, but still not 2,500, they lived their life in a very traditional, very biblical sort of way. And over the years, once the state of Israel was established, there started to become a connection and the realization that they can come back to Jerusalem, which was always their dream.
Their dream. We're going to continue to talk about that later. Maar eerst gaan we kijken naar een korte video die we hebben gemaakt in Ethiopië. Die gaat over de Aliyah vanuit Ethiopië naar Israël.
In Ethiopië wachten duizenden Joden totdat ze mogen terugkeren naar Jeruzalem. Deze Joden worden in hun eigen land de Falashja's genoemd. Onderzoekers ontdekten in de vorige eeuw dat de Falashja's Joden zijn die daar al sinds duizenden jaren geïsoleerd hebben gewoond. De Beta Israël. Nazaten van de stam Dan. Duizenden jaren lang hielden ze de Joodse wetten en gebruiken in stand, zonder te weten dat er wereldwijd nog meer Joden waren. Ze dachten dat ze de enige waren. De Falashja's zijn in hun geboorteland Ethiopië buitenstaanders. Verstotenen. Een stam zonder eigen land. Een volk zonder eigen koning. Een geloof zonder eigen stad. Maar met een groot verlangen dat ze eeuwenlang blijven koesteren om ooit terug te mogen keren naar het land van hun voorgeslacht. Het beloofde land Israël. Terugkeren naar de heilige stad Jeruzalem. Nadat Israël in 1948 de onafhankelijkheid uitriep, emigreerden miljoenen Joden van over de hele wereld naar de Joodse staat. Ze keerden terug naar het oude land van hun voorvaderen. Maar nog niet alle Joden kwamen. Voor de Falashja's uit Ethiopië is het nog niet zover. Vele van hen zijn arme, eenvoudige boeren op het platteland. Afgesloten van het nieuws, ver weg en geïsoleerd van wat er in de wereld gaande is. Zich niet bewust van die Joodse staat die zich een weg door de geschiedenis vecht. Onder de Falashja's verspreidde zich langzaam het nieuws dat de ballingschap was afgelopen en dat het beloofde land was herbouwd. Duizenden mensen trokken te voet naar Sudan om lopend naar Jeruzalem te gaan. Burgeroorlog en honger verhinderden de Ethiopische Joden om verder te trekken. Ze belandden massaal in vluchtelingenkampen. De uitbraak van hongersnood bracht het Israëlische kabinet ertoe om operatie Mozes te starten op 21 november 1984. Een clandestine luchtbrug bracht 8000 mensen vanuit Sudan over de Rode Zee naar Israël. Jesaja spreekt er al over. Wie zijn zij die als een volk komen aangevlogen en als duiven naar hun til? Hef uw ogen op en kijk, ze verzamelen zich en komen tot u. Uw zonen komen van verre en uw dochters worden op de heup gedragen. In de afgelopen decennia zijn er tienduizenden Falashja's teruggekeerd naar het beloofde land. Ook vandaag nog worden velen herenigd met hun familieleden in Israël. Sommigen na tientallen jaren van elkaar gescheiden te zijn. Maar niet iedereen van de Beta Israël is terug. Duizenden van hen wachten nog. In de sloppenwijken van Gondar woont Agari met haar man en 6 kinderen. De familie is straatarm en wacht al jaren op hun terugkeer naar het beloofde land.
እኔ እስራኤል ሀገር ለመሄድ እፈልጋለሁ ለጓጓለሁ እህቶችን ለመገናኘት እዚህ ውድ ዘመዶችን ውድ ወገኖችን ለመገናኘት እፈልጋለሁ እና አሁን ተህቶቼ ጋር ለመገናኘት እፈልጋለሁና ሌላ ሀገር ለመረሰዳለሁ እዚህ ተቀመጭን ጎንደር ከተማ ገና ተከታተልኩኝ እና በፊት ደን በቃ መጠነቀምጠን ነበር ቸገረን የቀን ሰራተኛ ብንልም ቸገረን በሩሾ በዛመኛ ተሰቃየነ ሀርነን ወደ ሀገራችን አሁን ደግሞ ተመልሰን መጣነ አዚ ችግሩ ስቅይቱ መከራ ነው በቃ ሆም ችግር ነው ራሱ እንደዛ ስለሆነ በቃ ሀገራችን ለመሄድ ወህቶቼ ተወገኖቼ ለመደብለቅ እፈልጋለሁ
Salina woont al 15 jaar in Israël, in Beersheva. Ze wacht totdat haar zus Agari toestemming krijgt om ook te komen. Beide zussen zijn al die tijd van elkaar gescheiden geweest.
לא ראיתי אבא שלי, כי נפטר. גם עכשיו אמא חזרה לי לאמא, אם נפטר, מה יהיה? בלי משפחה אנחנו פה, מאוד קשה. תעלו לי, באמת, תעלו לי לארץ, תבדקו איך היא שם, איפה היא גרה, איפה היא, אפילו אין פה, על הרצפה פה, על הכל היא יושנת, אין לה מיטה, אין לה כלום. קשה לה שם 80 נפשות, באמת, קשה לה.
እህቴ ስለኔ ጥራት ባላለች በቃ አብረን ስንኖር ትንሾሽ እንደሽና እንደሽ ማለት የተለያየ እንደሽና እንደዚህኛው ማለት ነው የተለያየነ ስንለይ እንደሆነ ተጠማያለሽ እንደሆነ ትነፈቀኛለሽ አብረን ስንጫው ስናወራ እንደነበረው እንደሆነ ነው መጠመኝ እንደንጨት እንደንጀራ ምትረበይ እህቴ ትናፍቀኛለሽ ለመገናኘት ተሳሳለሁ ስለማያት በቃ ስተማያት ድረስ እንትንላለኝ አስባለኝ
እና አخቴ ጋር የነበረው ጥሩ ነበር አብረን እየተጫወትን እየተደባደብን እንደ ኩታራ ያን በቃ እንደዛነት አብረን እየተጫወትን ውሃ እየተራጨን ያደግን አሁን ግን በእኔም ትንሽ ከፍተኛል እሷ አዛብ በመሆኗ እሷ እኔ ከዚህ በማኔ ሄጂ ግማሽ በቃ በጣም እንትን ነው የሚለኝ ከመዚህ ከባድ ነው እናትና እህት ወንድ መዛው ነው ከባድ ነው በጣም ካሽ በዝራት ተሸም ታሞ ማላቂ
Salina wacht in Israël op haar zus Agari. Met hen wachten duizenden Joden in Ethiopië om te worden herenigd met hun familie in Israël. Helpt u mee om hen thuis te brengen?
So, Danielle, what are the challenges specifically for this group of Ethiopian Jews that is still waiting to make Aliyah to Israel?
So the challenge is really the number of years that they've been separated from their family, like the family that you met in Israel and then met also in Ethiopia. There are sadly many cases where brothers, sisters, even parents and children have been separated for years. And this is a situation where, on the one hand, the legal aspects of the law of return, they fall short, and where we have to bring in our values as
human beings,
as people of faith, as human beings. Because what happened in Ethiopia over the last 100 or so years is that there were families that under a lot of pressure left Judaism, but they were never accepted into Christian society, and they kept their connection to Judaism in a way almost like the Jews that were forced to convert in Spain all those years ago.
Yeah.
But because of that step that they made and the way that the law of return is defined, it means that they cannot make Aliyah under the law of return. And so the government makes decisions that will allow for them to come. And over the years, families have been leaving their villages and coming to Gondar or coming to Addis Ababa, the capital of Ethiopia, and from there trying to join the community that is awaiting Aliyah. And in this process, you end up with legal aspects, bureaucratic aspects, and bottom line, very heart-wrenching, troubling aspects.
Yeah, and it's very complicated also.
Yes, and in this case, the Jewish Agency is very much trying to push through with the government of Israel to make the decision so that this waiting can come to an end.
And it's also something that Christians for Israel and Jewish Agency work together about, huh?
Yes, definitely. The support that Christians for Israel has been giving for years, and especially in the last 2 years, I would say, for Aliyah from Ethiopia, really from the start, from the preparation for the Aliyah, from the coming on the flights to Israel, and then also in Israel. You know, you don't come to the Promised Land once you land at Ben Gurion. The journey to the Promised Land takes a little bit longer. You learn Hebrew, you get work, you get education, you build roots in the land.
Yeah, because a few years ago you have said in a video that was addressed to Christians for Israel that you never thought that you would ever work together with an organization called Christians for Israel. I don't know if you remember, but maybe you can explain why did you say that?
Because I remember that I said that. So, and I hope that nobody took offense. So, you know, and
it depends on your explanation, I know.
Okay. So I'll make it a good one. So in Israel, you're very much in a bubble of, you know, being with, you know, a majority of a Jewish community around you. You don't have that anywhere else in the world. Everywhere else in the world, Jews are a minority. But in Israel, Jews are the majority. And so when you think about the mission of an organization like the Jewish Agency that I came, you know, to build my professional work in, you never really think that you're going to work with anyone but Jewish.
Yeah.
And when you study as a student in school, you study about the history of Judaism, it always comes with Christian persecution. Always. It's always there. And then when you come to realize that history doesn't always have to repeat itself, and that there can actually be a complete shift, and that all of a sudden there can be Christians that love and support Israel, and that can build a beautiful partnership and friendship with the Jewish people, that was something that to me was just unbelievable. And I don't remember if I said this back then, but at some point when I told my parents that I'm working with Christian Friends of Israel, so my father said, "Oh, that makes sense." And I said to him, "What do you mean it makes sense?" He said, "Yeah, you're just like me." And I said, "What do you mean I'm just like you?" And he said that when he was studying at university in the United States, a pastor found him and told him that he's trying to bring the message of Israel to churches in his area, and asked if my father would be willing to come and speak in churches about Israel and about Jewish tradition, and to tell stories about his mother's cooking for Shabbat. And my father did this for a good few months. I told him, "You never told me that story." And he said that to him it was on the one hand unbelievable, on the other hand beautiful, how he could be leading a Shabbat service in a church.
For Christians,
yes.
Let's talk about you, because you were born in the United States, right? And you made Aliyah as a very young girl. But your family's history is also Aliyah, 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 Aliyah.
Yeah.
Tell me.
So, you know, the fact that I can say, you know, I'm an Israeli is, I think, in itself this kind of little miracle, because it's only made possible through Aliyah. My father's family, they came to Israel from Iran in 1949. It was still the last days of the War of Independence, and my grandfather was very soon after that drafted to fight. And when they came, and my father was an infant, and my grandmother, didn't believe what her husband did to her, and he brought her to live in a tent, and then he went off to fight in a war, and she has a baby.
Wow.
And later she became the mother of 12 children, some 60 grandchildren. And she's not counting the great-grandchildren, because she's afraid of the evil eye. She even doesn't like it when I count the grandchildren. And that's how my father's family came. And my mother's family, so they come originally from Ukraine and Belarus of today. They came to the United States at a time when the doors to Israel were closed. And they were running away from pogroms and from violent attacks by their neighbors. And coming to the United States, my mother grew up, and after 1967, she started asking, what is this miracle in Israel? How does the country, defeat enemies in just a 6-day war? And so she came to Israel, and she met my father on Mount Scopus in Jerusalem, the dashing soldier. And they married. And they lived in the United States for a number of years, and then came back when I was quite a small child. And
Do you still have memories of that, of coming back to Israel?
So I have a memory, I don't know if it's real or if it's made up, but I have a memory of being on the tarmac at Ben Gurion Airport and being taught my first word in Hebrew, which was shalom.
Shalom. Perfect word to learn, huh? First.
Yes.
So you know a little bit, well, maybe you don't remember so much, but your family definitely, and you also, you know what it takes to make Aliyah.
Yeah.
So for people who make Aliyah, it must not always be so easy. First of all, they have to learn a new language, as you said. Secondly, Israel is a country that is constantly under threat of the neighbors, etc.
Yeah.
So is it safe for the Jewish people to go to Israel?
I think in many ways I would argue that Israel is the safest place to be a Jewish person. It's a place where you can live fully your identity in whatever way you choose, whether you want to be ultra-Orthodox or whether you want to be secular. And you know that the whole purpose of the country is to allow you to live that life as a proud Jewish person in the land of your forefathers.
But still, how do you prepare to come to a country that is constantly under attack in the media, in politics, in physical wars?
So, sadly, I think anti-Semitism is the oldest hatred in a way in the world, the oldest persistent hatred in the world. And I don't think that being a Jewish person living in another part of the world means that you are immune to being under attack. The one difference that Israel does make is that you know that you're now in a country that will stand up for you, and that the whole purpose of the country is to defend the Jewish people and to give them a home.
Yeah. Do you see the return of the Jewish people to Israel as a fulfillment of biblical prophecy?
Well, in many ways there's no other way to look at it, because when you understand that for 2,000 years it was virtually forbidden and there were such small numbers of Jews that were able to come back and to live in the land, and then you realize how the nation is born and the gates are open, and from 100 countries Jewish people are coming back to live in the land, and then you read it in the Bible. It seems very clear that it's prophetic.
Yeah.
At the same time, that does not mean to belittle in any way the personal choice, the sacrifice, the courage of the individual person that makes that journey.
Because you are also a traditional Jewish person, who takes the Bible seriously, who lives according to it. So for you as a traditional Jew living in Israel, working for the Jewish Agency, helping other Jewish people to make Aliyah, what is the most comforting or thing, or the thing making you most happy about doing this work?
There's so many things that are fulfilling and that make me happy. I think that what most makes me happy is when you're able to look not just through the eyes of the joy of arriving at Ben Gurion or at that first success at finishing Ulpan and mastering a certain level of Hebrew. I think that when you're able to meet the Olim after 5, even 10 years of living in the land, and you see that you know, if they were young adults, now they're married. If they were families, now they have new babies. You see how they are growing and developing, and you see how they are growing the roots in the land, and you see how the children or the grandchildren, you see how they are now fully Israeli, respecting, you know, the culture of their parents, maybe still speaking the language that their parents taught them at home, but still being a full part of Israeli society.
Last question. If we're looking at the future, how do you look at it? Hopeful? Worried? Something else?
I think that if a Jewish person isn't worried, so there's something wrong.
So you're worrying.
But at the same time, when you're in Israel, you can't help but believe in miracles and but be hopeful. It goes hand in hand with the DNA of the country. So we have to be very watchful. We have to be prepared. We have to remember everything that happened in the past and all the ways also in which we were blessed and are being blessed by God, and how we must constantly work to bring a better future.
Danielle Mor, thank you very much for coming. En u thuis ook bedankt voor het kijken naar deze speciale uitzending van de livestream van Christenen voor Israël. Ik wens u een hele fijne avond toe en graag tot de volgende keer.